All right, good morning, everyone. Hope you all enjoyed your milkshake for breakfast. I was just saying to Celine that I was actually hoping I could do this introduction from my bed because my head was not enjoying getting out and walking down here. So I'm appreciative, and Celine, I'm sure, is appreciative of everybody who made the effort to come down. And for all those watching in your room, we're very jealous of you. So, so I have the pleasure to introduce the amazing Céline Cousteau this morning. So, most of you have had a chance to meet her on the ship already and to see her earlier talk in the week. But I think one of the most profound things about Celine is her ability to see the connections and to tie everything together, and to always, I think, look for, particularly our as human beings, our place in the world and our context and our interactions and how the world affects us and how we affect it and how we belong in and are part of the natural world. And so I can't think of a better person to start off our final day at sea than Celine. So please, Celine, come and share your thoughts with us.
I may have done my presentation from bed too. That would be, I would have been, Chris had said that to me, and I was like, I wish you did. Like, we could have just zoomed you in. So thank you for being down here. I hope everybody got a decent night's sleep. And those of you who are still in bed, I hope you're really enjoying it. So I'm going to take you a little bit around the world. So we're going to start in the oceans, we're going to go onto land, and then we're going to go a little bit into our souls. Because as Chris said, what I like to do and the way I see the world is I try to make the connections between everything. And it was hard for me to understand why people don't see the interconnection of everything. Why us on a boat is relevant to kids, Janet, who are around the world. Why what we're learning in Antarctica is relevant to what we understand in our own homes. So we'll have time for Q&A at the end. But I start with this image because for me it symbolizes a lot of things. And you said the word perspective when we were having conversation. And that's one of the words that for me is important in our lives, is for us to gain different perspectives, right? So as photographers know well, when you move your body, you get a different point of view, right? Same thing in filmmaking. We get different points of view depending on who we're talking to, what kind of conversation we want to have. And then if you're looking at the image, you're seeing what the photographer saw, but you're not seeing what I see up close. And if you zoom out, you're not seeing where I am. So it's hard to understand anything without gaining more perspective about it. And that's where the word curiosity has crept in conversations throughout this week, is the curiosity to be able to actually understand things allows us to have more details and more connections with people. Conversations I've had on this ship have been really enriching. And at the complete end, I'll show you one of my favorite photographs. So this phrase by Chief Seattle, it summarizes the interconnectedness. Humankind has not woven the web of life. We are but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. So I ask people to think about one of these dewdrops on this spider web as absolutely anything in your world. It can be food, it can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a plant or an animal. And to start thinking about how is that one thing connected to others. So especially when I'm talking with kids, I'll take the example of food, right? So let's take a pineapple, right? So a pineapple is one dot on that web. Where does a pineapple come from? We'll go with a Costa Rican pineapple, my favorite. You have a farmer, right, who's growing the pineapple. You have the rain, you have the sunshine. And then you have somebody who's coming on a truck and who's taking the pineapple and driving it to a port. Then you have people who are offloading that pineapple onto a boat. You have a cargo ship that's going across oceans. You have the crew on the cargo ship. And then on the other side, you can keep following the process. And then you walk in your supermarket with your shopping cart and you choose a pineapple. And the moment in which that comes across your plane, you are connected to absolutely everything that pineapple is connected to. The people, the transportation, the fabrication of the vehicles, right? So we can think of the simplest of things because it's easier to make it tangible, but when you get complex, it's the same system. So when you're sitting at lunch today, take a look at your plate. Where did all of it come from? You are connected to every single person that made that possible. Daniel had said a couple of times, I never thought I'd come back to Antarctica. And that's because I've been here once before. We were filming 12 episodes for Chilean television. Chile has a very long coastline, so we were doing the oceans of Chile. And we did end up here in Antarctica. But to train to dive in Antarctica, you want to make sure that your equipment is working before you get here, because there's no shops. So we ended up training in the Patagonia fjords. Now, the water there is just as cold. It's about 0 degrees Celsius. We wear dry suits. We wear a one-piece fleece onesie underneath, wool socks, wool gloves, and then we have our outer gloves screwed on. So now we have very little mobility. Who here is a cold water diver? I see one in the back. That's it. Okay. Is it comfortable? Michelin Man. That's exactly it, right? So very little mobility. There's not much you can do on your own. You rely on your team members. We're also, in this case, not wearing a full face mask, but a lot of times we are wearing a full face mask so we can also communicate underwater. Yeah, it's really uncomfortable. Now, you'll see this is a very elegant way here of using duct tape. My dry suit was always too big on me. And so I would actually have to duct tape 1 pound weights to my ankles to keep my feet down and stop my booties from popping off. Not very convenient for diving if your booties are going to pop off your feet. When we were diving here, this was really just to test our equipment. As I was saying, the difficulty here is that we have a lot of salt and freshwater crossing over. And so your buoyancy is really tricky. In salt water, you float a little bit more. In freshwater, you sink a bit more. And there's not a lot of visibility here. What we ended up doing, we would get in the water, very little visibility, look face to face. And I was with my dive partner, and we were equalizing really quickly, but we couldn't see our dive computers. And all we knew is that we were sinking fast. We didn't know how far and where the bottom was. And he tells this story. We both had a little moment of panic. And then he said, and I looked at your face and you smiled. And in that moment, like, laser sharp focus, everything went into like, okay, get us out of here mode. So the moods and our reaction to things allow us to behave in different ways, right? So, and this will permeate throughout what I do, because when you're in these different elements, if you can't focus in the moments of difficulty, you're going to get in trouble. And in that moment, it was a simple smile that got us to focus. It was like, no, we actually know what to do, right? Don't panic. Nature has challenged me in the most amazing ways. And when people ask me what's my scariest or what's the scariest animal I've seen underwater, I'm like, no, it was the current, right? And it was my ability to deal with the current. It was my ability to be an animal within this ecosystem and actually not panic and make sure that I was safe. So this allowed us to also dive throughout the Patagonia fjords. In the Patagonia fjords, you have a lot of rocky outcropping, and there's a lot of shipwrecks. So a beautiful side to the story is we get to dive on these shipwrecks. It makes for great filmmaking. The negative side is you have a lot of shipwrecks that have polluted the fjords. But transportation has it such that we need to go through these different areas. Now, we also got to go to this amazing glacier and kayak and work with glaciologists who were there measuring the change in these glaciers. Yeah. A lot of times when I'm doing documentary films, I get thrown in front of the camera to do something for the first time. It was no different here. They said, okay, you're going to put on crampons, we're going to walk across the glacier, and you're going to rappel in. Okay. And you trust. You trust that you have the necessary skills. You trust that the people you're with are experts. They're there to keep you safe. And this is what we got to see. So absolutely stunning. I mean, much like what we're seeing here. So the ability to see these different ecosystems isn't just about the storytelling component. It's about to look at why are these relevant to all of us. I'm not going to go deep into climate change. I think we're all very well aware of what's happening. But this allows us to do the science on site. It allows us, if we're doing a documentary film, to actually support the scientists so that we can bring them there on a budget. Or if they're there, we actually combine efforts and we're able to share the information that they have found from these beautiful places. Look familiar? So this was actually Port Lockroy. You see the Seven Sisters in the back. We had an opportunity to go here and go for a dive. So what we didn't see on this journey in Port Lockroy is right in front of where you see that little red cabin. There's actually a whale cemetery. So it used to be a whaling station. There's a lot of whale bones under there. And we were able to go and document some of that, which you'll see in a minute. Some of the creatures underwater, perhaps, I don't know if in the sub some of you went down and got to see some of these different creatures, but just amazing nudibranchs. And then the penguins. They are dive bombers. They would just zip by us. We barely had any time to catch a glimpse of them, but they were, and this is the whale cemetery. So a testament to our past and our history, and that's also really important in the interconnection of everything, looking at how our past connects to our present. How do we shift and change? How do we learn from it? Something that I feel, this is an old whaling ship. This is me saying, my equipment's failing, I'm going up, see you later. So as you can see, there was just nonstop bubbles coming out. That was my regulator freezing open, my tanks just emptying out, which would mean the dive was over. I have to say it was not an unwelcome end, because at about 20 minutes, I'd be freezing anyway. But we had an opportunity also to just kind of play around icebergs, the safe ones, not the ones that are gonna tip over, and to see this cute guy. We disturbed his nap. Sorry. He'd been sleeping for a minute. But in these circumstances, you know, working with our team is essential. There's no one person that does anything alone. I said this in my first talk earlier this week, that if you look at any single person, including myself standing here on stage, none of this happens in a vacuum. It doesn't happen without a team. And there have been, much like in the example I gave earlier, circumstances in which we were put in danger and we had to make decisions. And the story of the current is I had to make a decision not just to be safe myself, but to be safe for my team. So we were diving on a shipwreck off the coast of California. There was a really strong current, and our strongest diver had to dive down, tie a rope to the shipwreck with a buoy to the surface, and another rope from that buoy to our boat. We would jump in the water, hang on to the cord, flags in the wind, make our way across with all of our equipment, and then have to pull our way down. What happens when we're filming is the film crew will go down first, and then the subjects, myself and my brother in this case, will come down second so that we can get that beautiful shot of like the blue background with the sun and the two divers coming down, right? So all of this is choreographed. And as I'm making my way down, I get to about 5 meters and I'm hyperventilating from the effort. So really hard with tanks on your back, with the current blowing that hard to actually move. Now, I was the least experienced diver on the team, but they're waiting down below for us to get there to get the images. And at 5 meters, completely out of breath, luckily, my brain kicks in. Thank you, prefrontal cortex. I was over 25, so it was fully developed. I stopped and I realized I was putting myself in danger, but I was also putting everybody else in danger. Because if I had gone down all the way to the bottom and I had an emergency, they would have had to save me. So I turned around, I go back up, the photographer's at the top holding her camera and hanging onto the rope, catching her breath. My brother goes down and does this. I said, you know, see you later, I'm going to the boat. They're like, okay. I get to the boat, I'm the only one on the boat. I take my gear off and I sit there, my ego right next to my gear. And the expedition leader comes out. He's a grumpy curmudgeon of a lovely human being. And he looks at me with a cigarette. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, why are you here? I told him the story. He's like, did you make the right decision? And I said, yeah, I did. He goes, okay, turns around and walks away. And that was his stamp of approval. So in those circumstances, we realize that when we're doing something, there's nothing more important than us staying alive, right? There's no shot that's worth it. But we are constantly tested in the field, right? Because we want to get the better shot, we want to get closer, we want to get the crevasse, we want to do this, right? At some point, you have to go stop. So I've been put in many of those circumstances. We're going to go brain for a minute, and then we're going to leave the brain behind. But when we talk about oceans, we can't not talk about traceability. Has anybody here heard about traceability, the term? Yeah? A few? No? So traceability on land is quite easy and compared to the oceans. It's the ability for us to literally track anything from its point of extraction to its point of use. So when we talk about our food systems, if you want to talk about your health or you want to talk about sustainability, we need to look at traceability. I sat on the Global Council of Oceans for 4 years. The Global Council on Oceans informs the World Economic Forum about ocean issues. We were asked to choose one subject to present in Davos now many years ago, and we chose traceability because it covers a lot of different topics. So this is just one example. If you look at extraction of a fish from the Bering Sea and then where it is actually consumed, you can see that it makes a lot of stops along the way. And if we don't have an understanding of what's happening along the way, we don't have an understanding of what we're eating. They've actually found that in some markets, they're selling you fish fillets with one name, but it's actually a completely different fish. So as consumers, we want to know what is it that we're eating, right? And there's several reasons for that. One is the presence of plastics in our ecosystems. So this is the prediction that 70% of deep sea fish have ingested plastics. 8 million tons of plastic end up in the oceans each year, and that by 2050, it's assumed there's going to be more plastic than fish in our oceans. So terrible for the environment, right? But what about us? So is anyone here familiar with Dr. Mark Hyman? Amazing individual if you want to talk about like holistic health. They did a study on 200 patients and found that 60% of them had microplastics or even nanoplastics in their arteries. So not only are we eating the fish, but it is staying in our system, it's staying in our blood system, it's impacting our cardiovascular system, which means it's impacting our overall health. What they found is that of these patients that they tested, those that were discharged from hospital were 4.5 times more likely to die of a heart attack or some kind of cardiovascular issue if they had these plastics in their systems. So for me, the environmental movement isn't just about saying let's protect fish for the sake of fish or oceans for the sake of oceans. It's like, no, let's put the human at the center of this story and see how it impacts us. And I really feel that that's how we actually change the tide. Not by shaming and blaming, but by empowering people with information and saying this actually matters to you because it matters to your health. Right? So the interconnectedness of all things. Remember the pineapple? Put a fish in its place or anything, right? This is another reason why, for me, it's really important for us to look at traceability in our oceans. Anyone heard of ghost ships? A few people? Yeah. So ghost ships are these vessels that are left out in the open ocean where there's no governance, because out in open ocean, it's about 200 nautical miles off the coast is no man's land. It doesn't belong to any country, which means nobody's responsible. And if nobody's responsible, but you have these ships with slave labor on board, who are we going to hold accountable? This also gives us an opportunity to look at traceability as a human rights issue. Because if we're able to actually trace fish coming from these ghost ships that have slave labor, then we're actually able to look at human rights inside the whole traceability ecosystem. So not only are we not knowing who's fishing, we don't know what the fishing practices are. And again, if your fish gets caught, transported, filleted, and gets sold under a different name, you don't even know what you're eating anymore. So what's been done, thankfully, is that traceability has risen to the top of a priority list, and we've looked at traceability in our ocean ecosystem as a priority. But how do you do that in the open oceans where there's no governance? This way. So the High Seas Treaty, it was ratified in June 2023. Essentially what it does is it creates marine protected areas out in the open ocean, which protects those ecosystems, but it allows us under marine protected area laws to go out and monitor. And then we're able to actually hold accountable. So this is where human rights, economy, governance, and health all come together with environmentalism, with conservation at its forefront. Have you guys heard of bycatch? Yep. Oh yeah, I heard bycatch. So in some places, even if you catch something that's edible, if you don't have a permit for it, you can't keep it. So I was aboard, and this was not a picture from there, but I was aboard a fishing vessel that was doing trawling, and I was talking to the fishermen, and they were saying we would love to keep everything that's edible in our nets, but we're actually not allowed to because we don't have permits for it. So they have to throw over edible food because they don't have the correct permits for all of the bycatch. But here's a solution, because there always is one. Anybody know Angel Leon, a chef out of Spain? No? Yeah, so Chef's Table, season 6. Can't remember the episode. But Angel Leon has proposed a solution. So he has risen to the top of the restaurant business in Spain, specifically in Cádiz. And what he has done is he's looked at all of this waste from bycatch, and he said there's got to be a solution to this. And his endeavor has been, how do we take the unwanted things from these fishing nets and make something delicious? And he went through a lot of trial and error. He was very criticized until he realized, wait, the Spaniards love sausage. Let's make fish sausage. And the moment he shifted the packaging, it was accepted. And now he has an amazing example of what we can do with all of this edible food that is extracted from the oceans. And he has a Michelin-starred restaurant. So we look at trash, bycatch, stuff that's thrown over, that's undesirable, and you make it desirable. For me, the inspiration of any of these examples, and so many more around the world, is that there's always a solution when we get curious and creative. And when we start collaborating with people who are in different industries, right? He now has a biologist on his team who's constantly researching things in the oceans to find out what is there that we're not using, where we can relieve pressure on other industries or under fisheries to be able to create these amazing foods. One thing he found with his biologist is there's an algae that grows, or a grass, sorry, that grows, and that has these little rice-like bits that grow off of it, and he's now creating sea rice, and he's making amazing risotto with it. So again, the creativity of people, the way our minds work, the way our hearts work, right, the way our palates work, can be a solution to finding, or can be a way to create solutions. For those of you who are divers, are looking for their next dive location, I recommend this place. This is called Cabo Pulmo in Baja, Mexico. Many, many years ago, the fishermen, they were just going out and doing very artisanal subsistence fisheries. And what they were finding is that they were unable to fish close to the shores, and they were having to go further and further out into the oceans in order to fish. So they were spending more on fuel to catch fish than they were making money on what they were selling. So they asked for support from the government and a conservation organization. They created a marine protected area. Nudibranch's my favorite. And for 10 years, they didn't touch anything in their waters. Now, they received a government subsidy in order to be able to have a proper economy. Their village, by the way, is completely off-grid. It's all sandy roads and solar power. It's all locally owned and operated places to stay, bed and breakfasts. And what happened in 10 years is the fish life returned. So when we talk about sustainability, I want to push one step further to talk about regeneration. Because if we're just sustaining where we are, we're actually not returning to the healthy baseline, which is where we want to go, right? We don't want to say that today is enough. We want to say, where was it supposed to be and how can we return to that? And this amazing example shows us that sometimes nature just needs to be left alone in order to recuperate. They didn't have to actually put any fish back in the ocean. They just came back. And this was the natural baseline of this ecosystem. Now, what happened is they started fishing again outside the marine reserve. Fish have no idea where the limits are, right? So they go back and forth. So they have that economy back. They're able to fish from the shore without using their boats, if they're the local from the village, inside the reserve, what they need to fish their family that day. So they have their fishery back, they're feeding their family, but who now goes to these places? Divers, right? And ecotourism. So because they operate all the bed and breakfasts and they started 2 dive shops, they now have a new economy. So there was an understanding that protecting nature was also feeding the family, was also bringing in an additional economy. So this is another example of, when we destroy, how can we return? We're now going into the jungle. We ready to leave the oceans? Is it okay? All right. So I've spent a lot of time in the Brazilian Amazon, in a place called the Vale do Javari, right there. It is in the Brazilian Amazon, 85,000 square kilometers. That's about the size of the country of Portugal or the state of Maine in the United States. There are about 7,000 indigenous peoples in many different tribes living in this territory. 2,000 of them, it's estimated, are uncontacted. That makes the largest number of uncontacted indigenous people on the planet living in this one area. As some of you might have seen, certain governments are not preferable for indigenous rights or environmental rights. That has been the case in Brazil. So there's been a lot of illegal encroachment on the Javari territory, not only, a lot of different areas. But in the Javari, this river here borders Peru and Brazil and is used for transporting drugs. And so what happens is you have narco trafficking that is encroaching on the western border of the Javari territory. You have illegal fishing and hunting coming in from the north. You have illegal gold mining coming in from the east. And then from the south, you have deforestation for hardwoods and for cattle ranching. Because this is an area that's extremely remote, you have to think completely in the middle of the jungle. It's very hard to monitor any of this. So if I were to have a wish for Planet, it was to go and just hang out a couple satellites there and be able to report there on a regular basis. And this is where, right, space and conservation come into play. When I was there in 2007, it was to do a documentary called Return to the Amazon, which was going back to places that my family had been in the early 1980s. I was there as a 9-year-old for a couple of weeks. And in 2007, we were able to go to a conference of the contacted indigenous people of the Javari. And during that time, we heard about the rates of hepatitis, which are between 50 and 80% rate of hepatitis, A, B, C, and Delta. Really high rates of malaria, amongst other diseases, mostly brought in by outsiders. And 3 years later, 2010, I get an email from Beto Marubo, and Beto says, we want you to come back. We want you to tell our story to the world. And that's how Tribes on the Edge was born. I didn't know what I was getting into, honestly. My son here, who's 12 now, I started filming when he was 1.5 years. So he has known this story throughout most of his life. This is the trailer to the film. You can also just go to the website, tribesontheedge.com, to take a look at it, but I'll just play this here.
No mundo não estão sabendo o que nós está passando aqui no Vale do Javari.
Greed is what has driven the invasion of other people's lands over the course of human history. In the past 30 years, we've lost 17% of the Brazilian Amazon.
This jungle, these waters, they have been in my life for a long time. When I was 9 years old, I went to the Amazon with my grandfather. 25 years later, I returned to the Amazon. Oil spills, dams breaking and leaking toxic sludge, and the government compromising indigenous rights. If they disappear, so will that rainforest.
Morrendo nossos parentes.
A saúde que está uma situação crítica em atendimento à saúde das populações indígenas.
We can't change history. We can't change the past. But we can make a better future by knowing our own past, what we've done, what we could have done differently, how we feel about it, and how we act on it today based on what the past teaches us.
We do not need to repeat history. If I truly believed in community and the interconnection of people in the world, I had to help tell his people's story. I had to go back to the jungle.
It's funny, I haven't watched the trailer in a while. And seeing it and hearing myself say I have to go back to the jungle, I just realized it's a reminder. So thank you, me. I haven't been back since 2019. We finished filming. It took us 3 years to film, 7 years to do the film, because I wanted to do the film and honor their voices. And they said, tell our story. They didn't say sell our story. As I said in my first talk, I've learned a lot from documentary filmmaking that if you're not involved in the post-production process, you release and let go of a lot of the creativity and a lot of how the story is told. So I did it as a completely independent film, and I very openly say unsustainably piecemeal and out of pocket, not doing that again, but there was only one way to do that, and it was to honor that until the end. I brought the film back to them in 2019, and I realized after the film festivals we did, after renting a van and driving the van and showing it in all these different places, and every single time I do a talk, I bring something up about the Javari, that the real audience was them. So when I showed it to them in 2019, there were about 150 representatives there, and 0 facial expressions watching the film. There's no judge, there's no jury, there's no festival, there's no awards that matches that moment for me. When the film ended and silence, and I looked at Beto and I said, I don't understand what's happening. And he said, oh no, if they're not saying anything, they like it. I'm like, oh, thank God. Okay. And then the really emotional bit is one woman from the Kanamari tribe came up to me and looked at me in the eyes and she said, thank you for seeing us. Oscar, thank you very much. That was it. Because we all want to be seen. We all want to be heard. We all want to be understood, right? It's just human. This is not indigenous. This is not cultural. This is not language. This is human. We want to be seen, heard, and understood, and we want to be loved and connected. That's the basis of everything. So when I think about this film and I think about, you know, what it took to get there, that moment was it for me. That was the confirmation of the ups and downs, testing of my conviction. When you look at this map, everything that's in orange is indigenous land. And you look at the statistic that indigenous people globally make up about 5% of the population, but they protect 80% of biodiversity on the land. We can start to see the really important interconnection of humans and nature in a positive way. The environmental movement has for a long time, and I'm happy it's shifting, but for a long time we used shame and guilt to try to motivate people, right? We've pointed fingers, or we've said this is the fault of human beings. Well, yeah, but what destroys can also create, right? Let's just keep going back to that. What destroys can also create. Depends who's there and how we're seeing our relationship with it. When we think about conservation, our direct allies are the indigenous people because they're there defending their home. It would be like saying your house empty is actually more susceptible to theft than if you're home, right? Because you're going to defend your home. People will be less likely. But when their rights are compromised, that's where we get into trouble. I take this as a small example of why biodiversity is important. So I'm not a biologist, I'm not an oceanographer, but I look at the interconnection of all things, and you think of this little plant, and you might think, okay, cute little flower, whatever. This is actually one of the clues to the cure to cancer. But if somebody hadn't looked at it with the potential that it has to actually understand it, then we wouldn't know that. It's the same thing on indigenous land. If they protect 80% of biodiversity, we can only imagine what's there, right? And the importance of also protecting that biodiversity through protecting humans. This was a project called Flying Rivers, done by a British couple who used a Cessna plane to fly over the Amazon and measure the humidity above the Amazon. And what they realized is that we have rivers in our skies. So condensation coming up from the Atlantic with the winds pushes it over the Amazon, the exchange of water systems, it hits the Andes, and when it hits the Andes, it goes south and then it rains, which means water coming from the Atlantic actually ends up being part of an entire system that covers all of South America. Why is it important to us? Go back to food. If any of your food comes from those areas, right, we won't have it if there's no rain. Which means if there's increased deforestation in the Amazon, there won't be that exchange of the water system. So again, everything is interconnected. It's not about over there and here. It's about how all those connections are apparent through our food, through our climate. Yeah. So these are the people I work for. The woman on your left is from the Marubo tribe, the gentleman on your right from the Matisse tribe, and everybody in society has a role to play. What this little girl is carrying is called Jenny Papo. It's actually used to do body painting. And the men will go up the trees, they'll throw the fruit down, The children are responsible for picking them up, and then the women will prepare it for painting on the bodies. Everybody in their society has a role. This is where empowering our kids to actually be part of our society, bringing them where we can, right, when it's safe, but also giving them a role because they have an importance in society, right? It's not, oh, just go over there, you're bothering, right? Like, get in the kitchen, let's get messy, right? And this is, I think, something that we have forgotten in our human communities as we have individualized, is that communal side. And I think that that's really necessary for our healing. We've all seen this picture over and over again. I've shown this so many times before this trip because of the word awe. It took people going to the moon and looking back at Earth to think about how awesome this place is, how beautiful it is. How can we create that by not leaving the planet? Sure, some people will go and they'll see this. My challenge is to say, how can we feel this being here? Some of you have heard of the moment I saw a whale eye to eye and felt my complete existence. This is actually a whale eye. Can you see it? Okay, it's a little low, but Brian Scarry is a photographer, amazing underwater photographer. I think if we, again, shift perspectives and look at things differently and just take a moment to pause, and Antarctica gave us this, the privilege of being able to go there and go, wow, I'm so small. And Chris, I asked you, like, what are you taking away from it? You're like, I want more time there, right? The vastness of it. We just touched a tiny piece of it. But touching that tiny piece of it and those memories stays in our bodies, right? It stays in our cells as part of who we are. Now, this is where I go out on a limb because there's people here who probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I know it's true, right? And now I'm going to read so I don't get this part wrong. So there's a quote, everything in the universe is vibration or frequency, which is energy. Everything both around and in us exists in frequencies that interrelate with each other. So we can think of voice, we can think of music, we can think of TV. Does it evoke emotion? Do you actually feel it? When you hear on the phone, you call your child and they say one word, vroom, right to the heart. Those are all frequencies, right? So our ability to communicate doesn't just come from images and words. It also comes from frequency. So what happens when you come across another human being? Have there been times where you have met somebody and immediately gone, kindred spirit, I feel good around this person, and there's been no necessarily any clear understanding as to the palpable part of it? That's our ability to feel and understand on a completely different level, right? So it goes on a planetary level. And this part, this is where I'm like, okay, Neil, if you're in your room, or anybody who wants to expand on this at some point. Oh, I just went back too far. Give me 1 second. Yes, this one. So Earth also has a magnetic field. And if you look at the parallels between our human bodies and Earth, and you start to think about these magnetic fields and how they intersect with each other, and you think they're happening on a micro level, but then they're also happening on a global level and beyond that. What is it that we're capable of doing and feeling without necessarily completely understanding it, right? So the magnetic field, it's also known as the geomagnetic field of Earth, is generated in our planet's interior and extends out into space, creating a region known as the magnetosphere. Without the magnetic field, life on Earth, as we know it, would not be possible, as it shields us all from the constant bombardment by charged particles emitted from the sun and the solar wind. Chris, do you have a thought on that?
Actually, so I this is coincidentally not, we didn't plan this, but this is what I did my undergraduate thesis on. So the Earth has a magnetic field. We use it for navigating. The moon doesn't have one. The sun has a huge one, has an enormous one. And not only that, the sun's magnetic field reaches out past the Earth and pushes on us. And if you look at a diagram of this, this might include it, but it's skewed a little bit because of the sun's magnetic field. And we know, I don't know if you've seen in the news for the last few months, there's been really good solar storms with great aurora, aurora borealis, aurora australis. It's been really vibrant. I saw some from the plane. That is the sun pushing stuff out through its magnetic field into Earth's magnetic field. And so even that is connected. And, everything that happens in space pushes on our atmosphere, changes the temperature, changes conditions on Earth, changes how our electronics work. It's all interconnected in that sense.
Thank you. I did not plant this one. I'm so glad that's what you did your thesis on. So I start to look at these things and I go, curiosity, right? I want to go a step deeper because I don't necessarily understand it, but I know it. And that knowing is something I think we should all trust, right? I started looking at this and going, well, wait a second. If there's these parallels, where are all the other parallels, right? So in the composition of human body, in the composition of planetary bodies, what happens in your physical body when one of your organs fail or when you're sick, right? The entire ecosystem of your human body starts to deteriorate, or you need more sleep, or you get tired, or you get cranky, right? Everything impacts everything. It's the same thing on our planet. So I go back to this human planet parallel and go, well, can we explain things in a different way so that there's a firm understanding? It isn't just climate change, it's actually health, right? If one ecosystem on Earth isn't doing well, that impacts the entire planetary health. So everyone's heard of the SDGs. What about the inner development goals? And how do those relate to our ability to work out into the world? So now I take a step back in my studies. I studied, my undergraduate studies was psychology. I'm interested in human behavior. Why are we the way we are? Why do we behave the way we behave? How do we influence that behavior? But the change has to come from within, right? We know this. So everything we keep saying about like, look out at the world, protect this, protect that. Well, what about what's in our interior? Are we doing the internal work? Are we doing the internal healing? Because at the end of the day, if we're not doing that, there's no amount of work we do out there that's going to make a real difference. Thich Nhat Hanh, anyone heard of him? The way out is in, right? Out of the mud comes the lotus. There's a lot of just beautiful phrases that we can keep repeating to ourselves of the realization of the more work we do internally, the more it comes out into the world, right? Gabor Mate, sorry, it's a little bit low on your screen. Gabor Mate is a psychotherapist, specifically working with addiction and trauma, but he doesn't treat the addiction, he treats the root of it, right? So that the behavior shifts, you have to go to the root of the behavior, the why. There's a great documentary based on him called The Wisdom of Trauma, which I highly recommend. He says, whatever you do in the world, do the same amount of work internally, because if you don't, your work in the world will not be as effective. So again, the interconnectedness of all things, right? I woke up this morning, I have a bit of a cold, my energy is low. What did I have to do? I had to dig a little deeper because I need to be here and give you this, right? But if I don't do that internally, it's really hard for it to come out. So it just takes a couple of minutes to go center, right? Same thing if we are reactive to our traumas, if we have triggers, we react in a negative way. When you do the internal healing and learn healing processes, you actually show up in the world differently, not as reactive. Something that would have made you angry or a person that triggers you, you're actually able to regulate. I hope my son doesn't mind me saying this. He's left, so maybe he's not going to hear it. But he, just before this trip, got hit in the face with a baseball bat. Total accident. And he had 3 stitches. I wasn't with him that day. I saw him the next day, and he's in the back of the car, and he said, well, when I was in the hospital, the nurse came up, and she had this really long needle. And I was like, wow, that must have been kind of scary. He's like, yeah, but it's okay, Mom. I did my box breathing. I started crying because my 12-year-old is box breathing to regulate his nervous system. This is what we need to teach people. This is how we can show up in the world, right? Instead of being reactive, being angry, being defensive, we can actually show up honestly and authentically. And that's when we do the good work. So these are a couple of, I think of just the healing modalities. How do we heal planet? We heal human. How do we heal human? Here's a lot of different ways, right? And there are so many more. These are just examples. But I only learn by putting myself through it. I'm an experiential learner. You can give me all the books. Yeah, I had to read about the electromagnetic field and bring on Chris. It's just not the way I learn. Maybe put me out in space, I'll get it a little bit more if I absorb it in. But we have all of this at our fingertips. And the amazing thing is, nature is everywhere. Nature is healer by default. There's a great book called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. He talks about nature deficit disorder in our children. So what's happening now is that children more and more are being kept indoors. We're putting them in classrooms. They're not getting as much time outside. We're not letting them get dirty, right? Just to absorb everything that's out there. We're creating an antiseptic environment for them. What he has discovered is that the rates of ADHD and attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity have gone up as we have isolated our children from nature. And so what do we do to keep them under control? We medicate, when all we need is to actually create a healthier balance. So we are knowingly medicating our children, blaming them for having too much energy, when in fact we're not letting them just be kids. So classrooms need to be outside. There need to be yoga balls so little boys can sit there and bounce while the teacher talks about science or math or whatever it is, because our bodies are in motion. That's our natural state of being. We're doing a disservice to future generations by depriving them of nature. Super simple. What they have actually found also in studies is that offices, corporations that have nature indoors in the offices, or even a picture of nature, have more efficient employees. Why? Because your neurology is wired to be near nature. And what they have found is those employees are more efficient at their jobs if they have access to nature. So we're seeing also the benefit in our executive functioning when nature is present in our lives. Natural ally, super easy. Bring plants indoors or put your people outside. So this is where I go back to the interconnection of everything. Who said this? Anyone know? We are all connected to each other biologically, to the earth chemically, to the rest of the universe atomically. Anyone have a guess? Nope. I mean, maybe he said something like it. He's on this boat. Neil deGrasse Tyson. This one, same. Neil, the problem often not discovered until late in life is that when you look for things in life like love and meaning and motivation, it implies they are sitting behind a tree or under a rock. The most successful people in life recognize that in life they create their own love. They manufacture their own meaning, then generate their own motivation. Also Neil. Here's a longer one. I don't think people are looking for a meaning of life. It's the experience of feeling truly alive that people are really after. Did we feel somewhat truly alive in Antarctica? She does that, nature. She's just there. Love has to spring spontaneously from within. It is in no way amenable to any form of inner or outer force. Love and coercion can never go together. Love can never be forced on anyone. It can be awakened in a person. However, through love itself. Love is essentially self-communicative. Those who do not have it catch it from those who have. Go back to the magnetic field. True love is unconquerable and irresistible, and it goes on gathering power, spreading itself until eventually it transforms everyone whom it touches. Who do we think this is? Not on the boat. Not Neil. Joseph Campbell. Anyone read The Power of Myth? Yeah. It is probably one of my most beloved books. So when I go back full circle and I look, what is the motivation in what we do? For me, it comes down to this, is we want to be seen, we want to be loved, we want to be understood. That's the human power of what we have. And we don't do it in a vacuum, we do it in community. Nobody actually heals alone. When you know somebody is truly hurting, they probably isolate. Go to them, just sit with them and be depressed with them for a minute. And you'll see the evolution of coming out of that. Because we need community, we need family, chosen family. We need for us to be in these common spaces in order to heal. And then I go back to an image I started my other presentation with, befitting for here, which is the idea of the iceberg. Albert Einstein said problems cannot be solved with the same mindset that created them. This is what we need to do. We need to shift our mindset, shift our perspective, just move in a little bit of a different place to see things differently. Have hard conversations. Bettina, do you mind if I show a picture of us? Okay. So I didn't have a favorite picture until yesterday. So Bettina and I had a hard conversation. Are you okay if I say it? Okay. So last night, I'm sitting up in the Constellation Lounge, and there's a photograph I talked about at the beginning of my talk last time. And for me, it was a perspective photograph. It didn't have another story to it except that there was a picture on my refrigerator of my grandfather and Fidel Castro talking to each other. And my mom, who's always been in the shadows, just popped behind them so she could be a picture. And they caught a quick picture of her. My story with that picture is my mom, who was unseen and unknown, was caught in a moment where two supposedly more important people than her were. Bettina came to me yesterday and very courageously shared a story that was very different than that one, about her own story in Cuba and her father who was imprisoned. So her perspective in that picture was completely different than mine. And she approached with love. She said, "I need you to hear me." And this is what happened. That magnetic field, that ability to communicate. I don't know if I told everybody I'm a crier. You're welcome, Daniel. You're not the only one. So this is what we are. This is all we are. This is what we seek. This is what we want. We want this connection. And when you do the work and somebody comes to you and say, "Hey, this is hurtful and this is why. My father was imprisoned because of a man that you spoke about, and I need you to hear me." And I tapped into my body that thankfully I've been regulating for years now. And I didn't get hurt. I didn't get upset. I didn't take it personally. I looked at her as a human being who was handing her heart to me. And that was it. This is all we need. I want to thank you all. I'm going to open for questions. And thank you, Bettina, for allowing me this moment. Yeah. Thank you. Does anyone have a question or comment? Yeah.
Inner exploration?
I think just by being raw and honest. So how do I encourage people to explore the inner development goals and the inner concept? By continuing to share it, by continuing to explore it myself and actually being able to bring it to other people, and sharing my own personal stories of that evolution. That's where I'm going next with a lot of my work, is not just to work from the outside in, but actually to sit with people and work through hard stuff. And to say the more centered we are, the more we can do out into the world, right? I was a very imbalanced environmentalist in that, the typical thing of self-sacrifice for others to the point of complete exhaustion and burnout. Well, that's actually terrible. Nobody should do that, right? They tell you in airplanes, if you have the mask come down, put it on yourself and then somebody else. That's what we should be doing all the time. But we can't do that if we don't have the tools. So part of it is just, sharing different resources and hopefully inspiring people to go take a peek and take a look. Yeah. Too much rocking, too early, too many emotions. Anyone else? Yeah.
Have you tried to open up your own intellect and consciousness by using ayahuasca with some of the tribes?
Is this filmed? So the question was, have I ever tried opening up my own consciousness with plant medicine? So in 2006, I was filming Return to the Amazon. This time we were in Peru, and we were filming with the Shipibo, but we were filming a project around camu camu, which is a high in vitamin C fruit. And at the end of filming, there's only 4 of us. At the end of filming, they said, "Do you want to go to the jungle and try ayahuasca?" This is 2006. Like, well, we have a spare day, so why not? But we were filming for PBS, so probably not appropriate for public broadcast. But we only did a capful, and I'll tell you what my experience was in a very simple way. I was not seeking any kind of specific experience, because in 2006, I didn't know anything about it. We just did a capful. The cameras were rolling, so I was very self-conscious about what was happening. But it was an ayahuasquero couple. So the two of them, a gentleman named John Easterling and myself, and my experience was all auditory. Now, if you see me talking to you and there's a lot of noise around, I will be staring at your mouth, because I don't differentiate sounds really well one from another. But if it's silent, I can hear everything. And what ayahuasca showed me is, it's just because I'm not choosing to. So my entire experience was auditory in that zero visuals, and I'm a very visual person. And I could isolate individual insects. I could choose to just hear the cricket or just the frog and quiet everything else, almost like a conductor. What it showed me is that we have so many capabilities that we don't tap into that are within us. All of these medicinal plants just show you the way. They don't create something different. And then I have been working with other different plant medicines, which I'm hoping can be part of the path forward. Nature gives us the solution to nature. It's right there, right? It's not for nothing that these are growing where they're growing. Yeah. Yeah.
Does anyone mind that I don't stand up? Because I'm going to tell this story of when I first met you, Celine. And by the way, I'm Elizabeth Shatner, Bill's wife. And we've been together over 25 years. And one of the forms, when I filled out the form, you were one of the people that I really wanted to hear speak. I so admired your family and all the documentaries. I've been following it all my life. So when we were at the palace at the event, there was an event for the featured guests. And Bill got whisked away to do press. And I found myself on tour by myself, but next to this very energetic lady. And we passed a ballroom or a dining room, and she says to me, "That makes me feel like going in and twirling, right?" Or something, dancing like that. And I thought, oh, she's fun. Then I said, "What, on the table? Would you like to take a big slide on that table?" And still, I didn't know it was Celine. We walked down the steps into the garden and started to become acquainted. And I said, "Well, what do you do?" She goes, "Well, I do documentaries. I did one in Antarctica, all in Spanish." And I thought, I said, "Are you Celine?" And I might have said Celine Dion, because I've been, because it just, I don't know, Celine Dion pops out of my mouth, and I mean Cousteau. But that might have been, in that moment, what we've been talking about, synchronicity, the magnetism. I felt an immediate kinship to you in joking. So then, when we went into the other ballroom, I was trying to get a shot out the window, and I was wearing a skirt. And with her twirling encouragement in my brain, the register just picked up the skirt and did a Marilyn Monroe moment. And I'm like, I could be really embarrassed, or I could go with this. Okay, so I went with it. And one thing my husband has taught me over the 25 years is to come out of your comfort zone. And that's what Celine said to me when on the garden standing there. She said, "I've become comfortable in the uncomfortable." And I think that might not be a direct quote, but that got into my brain. And I said, "I hope to learn that." Of course, when I said that, she said, "I hope to teach you." And in my brain, I was visualizing being freezing and not having anything to eat, all those physical discomforts. So I wasn't going to speak. My hands are sweaty. I'm not comfortable speaking like my husband is, or you are. But I thought, if I don't take this opportunity to stretch my comfort zone and come out of it and share this with you and realize that maybe that's one thing that draws all of us together. We've all, in our own ways, come out of our comfort zones to come onto this ship. And then that's the interconnectedness of that to every explorer before us that has done the same. To every astronaut, every person who's dealing with their own grief and their own emotional problems on this ship, to leaving the families to explore, all of it. It all just is so meaningful in this moment. And I, too, had a moment with, Bettina. So what is that? Is it the magnetism? Is it just food for thought? And I enjoyed meeting every one of you and sharing this wonderful experience. I'm blessed and grateful.
I think that's...
Hi, Daniel.
A hug? No? Yes, come on.
I'm holding my breath.
Don't get up, don't get up.
Getting a cold over. Don't say you never gave me anything.
A big round of applause, please, for Celine.